Hello and welcome to another edition of PAVE's weekly virtual discussion. My name is Ed Niedermeyer. I'm the Communications Director here at Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. We're very glad you've taken time out of your day and week to join us for what I think is not only a really interesting topic, especially considering we're looking at something that's really at the cutting edge of this technology in terms of actual driverless operation on real world roads. But also this is just really important, I think, as a sort of example of sort of where the AV space is and where it's going in terms of developing a relationship with the public sector and how important that is. So today we are lucky to be joined by the folks who are really at the front line of the public-private partnership to put actual driverless cars on public roads safely. And that's of course happening in Chandler, Arizona. And we are thrilled to be joined today by, from Waymo, we have Global Head of Public Policy, Michelle Peacock. Michelle, welcome. Oh, and you are muted.
I'm muted. Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks, Ed.
And from the public sector, we're thrilled to have from Arizona DOT, we have Deputy Director for Policy, Kevin Biesty. Kevin, welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody.
And from the Chandler Police Department, we have Police Chief Sean Duggan. Chief, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone.
So as I mentioned, we're here to talk about sort of the kind of relationship that is required between an AV developer like Waymo and the public sector partners in order to create a fully driverless deployment. I do want to emphasize, I mean, this is really kind of sets it apart from a lot of what has happened elsewhere, and we will try and focus on sort of the unique issues that are raised by going completely driverless as opposed to having autonomous vehicles with a safety driver behind the wheel. But Michelle, I want to start with you. I want you to take us back to sort of the beginning of this relationship. Sort of how early did the relationship with Arizona and Chandler start, and sort of what were what was the initial focus for that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So, and again, thanks everyone for having Waymo be a part of this. At Waymo, we think it's super important to have this kind of collaborative relationship with local stakeholders. And before we began doing any testing in any market, but here in Arizona and in Chandler, it was no different. I believe we reached out early in 2016 in Chandler, and we started testing in April of 2016, and then continued to expand our local outreach, ever since.
And was driverless sort of an initial from the beginning, or has that been sort of something that's been sort of the focuses? Were there things that you were focused on sort of initially before you got towards the driverless piece?
Well, yeah. So, as we want to stand up a commercial business in a place like Chandler, which we have today, there is a ramp, and so there's a lot of groundwork that has to be done in advance with testing and that sort of thing, and that of course led us to last month, where we launched the world's first commercial public service with a fully autonomous technology.
And Kevin, Arizona has become really a hotbed for AV testing. They're able to attract a bunch of companies there. So sort of going back to those early days when Waymo was first coming to town, sort of what was the state of Arizona? What was your sort of mandate on the state side? What were you trying to accomplish as you began sort of engaging with Waymo and companies like it?
Thank you very much. So actually it started earlier than that, around the 2011 to 2012 time period. At that time, it was Google and other tech companies were approaching states about what would be needed to test this type of technology in their states. And that's the time where some states had passed, laws through their legislature. But at that time, our legislature felt that it was a little premature. And they tasked us with looking at what are our current regulations and what that may look like when this happens. And quite frankly, it's important to point out that every state has different laws. We have very similar driving laws, but there are nuances that are different. And the structure here in Arizona with the DOT and the Motor Vehicle Division and a rideshare program all being within one agency, it was a lot easier to look at what we could and couldn't do. And quite frankly, Arizona had all the regulations they needed at the time to test these types of technologies, especially when there's an operator in the vehicle. Car manufacturers have been testing on our roadways for decades, right? And everything for all the technologies that are in our vehicles now, even things as simple as automatic transmission, right? When they were putting those in vehicles, they didn't come to each state and say, hey, we got this whiz bang technology, can we come and test? So we started putting those parameters in place and looking at what we currently had. And then in 2015, we had our first executive order, which opened the doorway for this. And then it was working with our locals. We had a meeting early on with Chief Duggan and the leaders of Chandler. And I think that's a key component of this is the interaction between the different government entities in the state. And so far it's been positive and in my opinion, successful.
Yeah, and Chief Duggan, so you tell us about your sort of initial exposure to this. Kevin came and said, hey, you might not have heard of this driverless car thing, but they're coming, get ready. What was that like?
Well, a number of things I would say. First, it was very exciting because obviously this is pretty impressive technology, but at the same time, there were so many questions from how does this work? How safe is it? There's something as simple as who gets the ticket if the company's at fault. So what was very helpful from the beginning was how at the time Google, then Waymo, just met with us. They had really opened the door for dialogue and communication and were very responsive to answering questions. But then as the technology progressed over time, then we were informed. So we were kept abreast, and it just put us in a much more comfortable place, knowing that we have this two-way communication, and we learned a lot on the way, and then we were able to share that with our employees as well. So the technology is pretty amazing, and of course, our mission as a police department is to help keep our community safe. And we recognize that this is technology that quite possibly can help keep our community safe because the majority of all collisions are man-made. So if technology can help reduce that, it's something that we would support, we would be in favor of, but it's also technology, again, we knew nothing about. So just getting coached along the way has been very, very helpful.
Yeah, and kind of out of professional curiosity as an AV educator, I just was wondering, I mean, were there, besides, your conversations with Waymo, did you do other things to sort of educate yourself? Because you're right, it is complex technology. It's hard to find. I'm always curious about how people are sort of educate themselves about this.
Well, I mean, everyone's going to have a different level of interest in the technology, but certainly this is something that impacted our city. So we had to learn as we went along. But the bigger questions were, how do we respond if there's a collision? Who gets notified? So all those many facets of unknown questions had to be answered. So that's how we became educated along the way, working with them, finding those answers, and then working collaboratively with the state, the Department of Public Safety, to really put this all together, because at the time it may have been unique to Chandler, but obviously this is something that would affect the entire state as the technology grew. So we had to make sure that whatever we were doing would be a blueprint that would be useful for others throughout the state, other jurisdictions. So working with the Department of Public Safety, we were able to create that playbook essentially on what to do if A, B, and C were to occur. So that has been very helpful, and that's something that was a great collaboration between the state, working with ADOT, working with DPS, and working with Waymo.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love about AVs is that, when you learn something new, like you learned to do something completely new that no one else had done before, and now there's an opportunity for everyone else to learn from your experience. And so I can't wait to get more into some of those details, but still at a higher level, Kevin, it's fascinating because I think there's sort of a perception, at least among some, that Arizona, was attracting, AV companies through sort of having, minimal regulation, but at the same time, clearly, here you have, multiple levels of government, from local to state, that are clearly really engaged. So it's not like you were just sort of free for all, right? Describe sort of what that balance is like, and sort of why, how you struck that balance, and why that was important.
Right. So, as far as the regulation, I know I get that question also. I mean, Arizona I'm from New York, right? But I'm a native here and a proud resident of Chandler. And, Arizona may be the Wild West in certain situations, but definitely not in this. This is the regulation book on operating a vehicle in Arizona. Okay. And so what we're doing a lot is, particularly at the beginning, is you have an operator in the vehicle. And so that vehicle has to obey those traffic laws, just like every other vehicle. We have had a situation, obviously, we had tragedy strike here in Arizona, in Tempe. And, through that tragedy, having been part of the NTSB investigation and things like that, we've learned a lot. And we're also learning that the current system is working, okay, in the sense that those that need to be held accountable are being held accountable. The operator of that vehicle is currently under indictment. But we can't lose sight of the fact that, as you mentioned, with the human element, a large part of the roadway operation, when users of the roadway don't follow the rules, bad things happen. And so the more we can make improvements in that area, whether it's through technology, which I think is the answer, because we've tried everything from penalties to, with the carrot, the stick, and yet we still see tens of thousands of families, tragically impacted every year. So I think we've struck a nice balance. As these technologies advance, Chief Duggan made alluded to the fact that, working hand in hand with the technology companies and understanding and evolving together is the way to do it. Because early on, there was no conversations. Private sector didn't trust the government didn't know what the private sector was doing. And now that has been smashed. I've been in government almost 30 years, and this is one of the few things that I've seen where across the spectrum, from the highest, from the governor, all the way across the city council members and chiefs of police and fire departments, everybody is unified and cautiously, but proactively helping to develop these technologies with the industry.
Absolutely. And Michelle, this was, obviously, Waymo and Google before Waymo was Waymo, has been testing in California and elsewhere. And we actually just a couple weeks ago had a really fascinating conversation that included the Chief of Police of Mountain View, who obviously has been engaged with this project for a long time. What sort of did you learn in some of the things that you learned early on in those relationships that you were able to then sort of take into the relationship with Arizona?
Yes, so we have a great relationship with the Mountain View Police Department, and still work with their team to provide similar sort of transparent updates that we've done, with Chief Duggan. I think that was a great place for us to learn about what the needs are of local law enforcement and local agencies, and how we can deliver, meet their expectations on levels of transparency and with updates, and help us develop a playbook that we can use here in Arizona, and hopefully again in other parts of the country when Waymo is able to expand. And I think that early law enforcement training aspects really just goes to the heart of what what we do, is that prioritizing safety, making sure that the folks in the community are up to date and know how to respond if there's ever an incident, and have that open lines and channels of communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chief Duggan, sort of, was there a point where it sort of felt like, okay, we've done the things that sort of Waymo had figured out before coming into this, and now we're sort of, okay, you mentioned sort of going into new areas. So where was that line? What were some of the things that you really felt like, wow, okay, now we're we're pushing the boundary here. We're doing new things.
I think one of the things that comes to mind was back in 2017. I know it was during the summer because it was very hot that day, but we did a series of testing with Waymo and our different type of sirens that are assigned to our vehicles, so both police and fire. And we spent a couple days just doing multiple runs and iterations and using different siren types to help in the testing and the recognition of emergency sirens for the autonomous vehicle. So that was just one example to help promote their technology. But really, the lift on our part was then working with the state and the other stakeholders in creating that protocol, that guide, that playbook. So in essence, if there was an event, what would the responding officer or firefighter do? And from there, we're able to create a portal in our Department of Motor Vehicle that all officers that can access throughout the state with all the information as far as who's responsible, what the insurance information is, and also how to move the vehicle, or maybe if the fire had to do some type of extrication. A lot of that information then is available to our first responders, how to deal with that particular vehicle, because there are nuances, especially with the whole array of batteries. It makes it very, very different than a normal vehicle. And then in addition to that, we also helped produce, really our fire department drove this, a video for first responders that was filmed in Chandler, and that has been used throughout the nation. So we've been active from day one. And let me just echo something that was just said. From that very first meeting, I remember sitting in the room, but I was also there with our mayor, our city manager, some council folks, and other city officials, and the fire chief. So the very first introduction was a full team effort. It wasn't something that I had, that someone reached out to me personally. This is a collaboration, I would say, of epic proportion. And it's one of the first collaborations like that of its kind that I've seen in my policing, in my career, for a new technology. So that was impressive. And then those stakeholders, those folks have been involved from the beginning, and they still are.
Yeah, and I think we hear that a lot about that, sort of really having to have all levels engaged in the conversation together. But you know, there's also you know, as public sector employees, you know, you all represent, you know, the public, right? The community, and that's another piece that you know, we hear a lot. You know, it's really important to have that engagement. And I'd like to get sort of all of your views on sort of the role of that and what's been done there. But Michelle, I'd like to start with you. Sort of how do you approach the community? How do you get a sense of sort of where they're at with this technology and what's happening on the roads that they share?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this, because obviously the community is so critical. Having their support and understanding and awareness is instrumental to our ongoing success there. And so we've done a lot with local engagement, really focusing on a couple big areas. First is public education. You know, most people don't have the knowledge about what constitutes autonomous vehicle technology. It's not something that they're super fluent in their everyday life. And so we've been doing a lot of work to, you know, make that information a little bit more accessible. And, you know, working with events in the Chandler community, just trying to, you know, sponsor and support those events and give people opportunity to access more information to learn more about AVs. We did the, you know, 4th of July spectacular, and I think the parade of lights and those kinds of things that just really connect the, you know, Waymo One business to the Chandler community in a really direct way. And then we also, you know, in addition to working with state and local governments and law enforcement, we've also worked with some public advocacy organizations like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, AAA, Foundation for Blind Children. Again, to sort of put another light on how this AV technology can, you know, address community issues and improve people's lives. And I think that's something that's been really helpful in sort of, you know, knitting together the concerns a community may have with understanding the technology and all the benefits that it can provide. And, you know, we've done some partnerships in Chandler with groups like the let's see, the Valley Metro, for example. That's been a project where we've tried to show how AV technology can help connect first and last mile connection to the community, to public transit, for example. I think that's a really great demonstration. And then the other part is this feedback loop. So we constantly seek feedback from our community about their experience, what they're looking for, what they liked, what they didn't like. And also feedback from the community, just observing from folks who haven't even been in a car yet. Get feedback from them about what their expectations are, what they like to see or not see, and then try to incorporate as much of those learnings into how we continue to run our business.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning education. Always makes us here at PAVE happy to hear about that. And Michelle may not plug it, so I will. I may not have plugged it, so I will. Let's Talk Self-Driving is Waymo's educational initiative, and it's really great. It's great to have allies out there in this educational.
I can talk about that extensively. Let's Talk Self-Driving is phenomenal, and it's that campaign has done a tremendous job, really. Again, public education, making sure people have a place to go, resources to learn more and experience it in their own community.
Yeah, and Kevin, from the state level, sort of how is that feedback loop, that listening, how's that played out for you all?
Right, so from the state perspective, initially we meet with the companies. We try to understand what it is they're trying to accomplish, what's their vision, how does that fit in to the Arizona model. Where would you like to test? Do you have a location? And then we help collaborate with the local governments, because that is absolutely key. I truly believe at some point, people are going to look back at the Arizona experience and look at particularly the Waymo Chandler partnership. And we've taken some very valuable lessons from that and incorporated that into our processes. The collaboration is amazing. But one of the things we ask the companies, and we put the onus on the companies, is we're not going to advocate or promote their technology. It is up to them to lead in the community with their partners to show the technology. And I think that's something that was done very well in the East Valley of Arizona. Again, living in Chandler, we see Waymo vehicles all the time, and people just, I've never received a call from anybody, questioning, what's going on. Neighbors, my kids' schoolmates, the only question I ever get is, when do I get to go in one of these, right? So I think the more people learn about these, the more they see them and experience them, I think there will be more public acceptance. And again, I also think that, it's really critical for the companies to not do things in the shadows necessarily. And then we help amplify what some of the benefits are.
Yeah, and Chief Duggan, I'm really interested in your take on this as well. And actually, we have a question from the audience that's sort of related. And I know it can be hard to tell exactly what's happening sometimes from sort of scattered media reports, but someone asked, sort of, what actions has the police department taken against people attacking AVs deliberately? Again, I know there've been some, kind of stories about that, and I'm just curious, that's part of the community involvement, engagement with this issue. Sort of, can you cast some light on that, or just sort of help us understand what your role in all this has been?
There's really two parts of that. Let me just first echo what Kevin said. We did not drive the public information at all. That was done by the company. Our city, they saw an interest in the collaboration, whether it's attracting tech firms to our city. This is a part of Chandler's brand. So they had their public information, but as far as what drove this, that was exclusively done by Waymo. What I thought was reassuring to the public is that when we had these discussions, that the police department and fire department, we were there. We were present for the meetings, and we were brought in from the beginning. So I think that gave some reassurance to some folks that may have questioned the technology or the safety of the technology, at least to know that their public safety was an active partner during this process. So again, that goes back to the communication, but we didn't drive. We are a neutral entity, and we just focus on what's the best practice and how we can make our community safe. And certainly this is something that we would embrace, and certainly we would be interested in exploring, let alone partnering with. But getting back to the incidents, and there's actually been a few dozen over the years, incidents where it could be a road rage situation, and that is attributed to the fact that there are some people in the community that don't necessarily like to follow the law. And when Waymo makes a complete stop, or a Waymo vehicle actually goes the speed limit, there are some people that have problem with that, and they would have a problem probably with anyone obeying the law. So that's not unique to Waymo. That's a reflection on that person. And we've had incidents where we've had former employees that have gone out, Waymo employees that have caused some disruption on the roadway. And then we've also had a variety of different incidents where we've had rocks thrown at Waymo. We've had some damage done. And there's no common theme. There's no common denominator. Every one of those are independent and have their own reasons. But at the end of the day, those are very, very infrequent. And here in our community, it seems very clear. Again, as Kevin said, we see dozens of these vehicles every day. You cannot see Waymo vehicle if you are going to and from any place in our city. So that has become quite the norm. And I think in our community, a lot of people are simply used to that now.
Yeah, it's fascinating that science fiction kind of tends to portray robots or autonomous things as being the scary thing, but it seems like as we step into the sci-fi future, it's humans that are actually kind of where most of the scary behavior seems to show up. Michelle, again, the driverless piece of this is really what kind of sets it apart. So, and this time has flown by. I can't believe it's already almost a half hour up. But can you just help us understand, sort of as you move towards that driverless piece, what were some of the things that were really just important to work with your public sector partners on?
Yeah, I think, again, this two-way communication is super important, and we'll continue to do that. And then, we doing the training with the first responders on, how to interact with the car if something goes wrong, because there isn't a human in place. And I think those are the things that we'll continue to do. And I think too that there are issues that we'll have to tackle with technology, with our product and engineering teams on road rule requirements that are sort of human centered, and we'll just have to continue to engage directly with the with Kevin and Chief Duggan and others in the community, and hopefully our brilliant engineers can come up with some solutions to answer some of these questions as they arise. But I think this ongoing communication, raising issues, collaboratively working with the local authorities to try to address them is the thing that we do the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And amid the sort of ups and downs of public perception, I think people often lose sight of the fact that I was lucky enough to go for a first ride in Waymo in 2016, and the progress up to 2019. I mean, it's just amazing, and it continues to be so. So hopefully. Yeah, that I think it seems safe to assume that will continue. Kevin, sort of as driverless becomes, we now have, not necessarily in Arizona, but elsewhere, we have a lot more companies applying for driverless permits and things like that. So from a state perspective, as this goes from being a fairly small, I think Waymo said it's about 50 square miles right now in Chandler, to certainly Waymo, I think, plans on expanding its driverless service, and of course other companies are wanting to take that step as well. Sort of what is the state sort of looking at as that becomes more of a normal thing?
So as I mentioned before, when companies are interested in looking at doing any type of activity here in Arizona, we have a team of individuals that will meet with them, see what their goals are, how they match up with the Arizona program. We visit, COVID has kind of put a kibosh to it, but oftentimes we visit their facility. We want to get a sense of their culture, particularly their safety culture. We want to see the technology. We want to see how it works. We've had instances where, one of our public safety representatives would notice something I think of a particular incident. It was a commercial motor vehicle. One of the sensors was outside the width of the that could cause that truck to be pulled over by a law enforcement officer. So he was able to notice that, and they were like, "Oh wow, didn't realize that." So you know, it's those types of interactions. You know, I got to give a shout out to the chief. We had a bunch of DOT leaders from around the country meet here in Chandler. Gosh, it was about a year ago, and they were completely blown away by the presentation by the Chandler PD and the fire department of the collaboration, the video, actual changes to the color design of certain pieces of the vehicle to help better show first responders, you know, this is bad, this is good. They were just completely blown away. And that's where I say, I think that, you know, it's going to be looked at as a model in the future. And we've gleaned many great best practices from these types of collaborations.
Yeah, and I want to follow up with you just really quickly on a piece that you mentioned. You talked about observing the safety culture of a company.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because I tweeted about this the other day because this is something I've been hearing a lot talking to our members and you know, about how safety culture is so important. But you get pushback of like, I got someone on Twitter of people being like, well, why is a regulator or, you know, sort of judging companies based on their company cult? I don't think people necessarily understand that. Why is that important? That you know, you experience that culture in a kind of holistic way and get a sense of them. Why does that matter?
So we pretty much would use that as a quote unquote measurement from the beginning. But even in the NTSB report, it pointed out that you know, there was some issues with the culture of the company, and that made us focus and think real long and hard about what does that look like. And I got to tell you, and I won't go into much detail, but there were signs afterwards that thought, you know what, we may need to keep an eye out for things like this. One of the things we've learned about safety culture is it's great, and every company has this, right? Here are the things you need to do as an employee to keep safe. That's great. But how do you hold the employee accountable and the supervisor or the company accountable that those are being met? Right? So again, I tell this to people often, we don't have all the answers, okay? We are learning just like everybody else, and we are evolving, and we're picking up these pieces that we're able to look at and go, well, what does it mean for you when you say that you hold your employees accountable? You know, is it the two drivers that are buddy-buddy? What safety mechanisms do you have to go in to check that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? So it's those types of examples that, again, we continue to develop, evolve, and work with companies on.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, the first time I rode in a fully driverless vehicle, I asked myself, it was a Waymo, I asked myself, how is it that I trust Waymo so much that I just literally put my life in the hands of their technology? And frankly, it is the culture. I've been exposed to them, and you know, when you're around organizations and you get a sense of what their values are, that definitely makes a huge difference, and trust is so huge in this business. Chief Duggan.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I don't mean to take away from the chief's time, but you know, you just like set this beautiful stage to talk about the safety framework that Waymo released a couple of weeks ago. And it's, you know, the world's first autonomous vehicle company. We released this report, which is called the Waymo Safety Methodologies and Safety Readiness Determination. And it's, you know, it walks the reader through. It's pretty dense, I will tell you. There's a lot of stuff I'm still processing in it, but it's a multi-layered approach to safety that just makes it possible to deploy these fully autonomous vehicles. It sort of shows the processes that we go through in order to have that confidence. And then married up with that framework is a report. And so it is a very transparent report talking about all of the driving, the millions of miles that have been driven. We use that Chandler in Arizona as the basis, as we have the most data from that location, and releasing that also to the public. And so, you know, to Kevin's point that, you know, how do you build confidence with these companies? How do you trust their safety practices and their culture? I mean, you could look to a company like Waymo, this is a big pitch, that, you know, we've gone through the process shared that with the public, and prepared reports with data that shows how we're measuring up to what we say is important.
Absolutely, and thank you for mentioning that report and that data. Certainly, that was raising the bar in terms of transparency with that data in particular, and we'll be sure to tweet out links to those when we send this video out on Twitter. Chief Duggan, I've spoken to regulators at every level in this, looking at AVs, and I'll tell you, everyone is kind of intimidated by AVs. It's just a very, very complex, challenging topic. And I think especially as you get to the more local levels of government, it can just feel overwhelming sometimes dealing with this incredibly complex technology. What advice would you give to folks who've been in your position? Maybe, in terms of actual, prescriptive things to do, or maybe about sort of the attitude or the approach. What has worked for you in terms of coming to grips and building your own confidence that you are keeping your citizens safe with this experimental technology?
Right, so Ed, that's a great question, because this is so out of my wheelhouse. I mean, we can have a whole conversation on that. I'm not an engineer. I don't understand the technology at all. So I need to be in a place where I have trust, and I'm comfortable with the new technology and the understanding. So that comes from the beginning, that very first meeting and onward. So continually taking those small steps to keep us appraised of what's going on, try to inform us when there's a new iteration of technology before we see it on the news. We have a liaison in the PD that has a direct relationship with folks in Waymo, so we get notified any type of change that's going to affect our department or our city. So that is so critically important, and it's just forming that level of trust. And the other thing that I recommend is one of the players not on this meeting today is our fire chief. They are an equal player in this, and they have just as much of a response, especially if something bad were to happen. They have a critical role in helping keep the community safe. So it's been a joint operation between myself and Chief Wiggins from the beginning, and we ensure that our folks are informed, and then we are informed by Waymo. So again, the communication cannot be overstated, but that relationship with all the players, but certainly between PD and fire, is critically important.
Yeah, and I think that if we've sort of come away with anything from this whole conversation, it's just how important that communication and relationships really are, because anytime you step into unknown territory, you want to be with friends, right, and with people that you trust. So I thank you all for taking the time today to come and sort of open a window into the really exciting and pioneering work that you're all doing in Arizona. Michelle Peacock from Waymo, thank you so much for taking the time and talking with us today.
Thank you very much.
Kevin Biesty, Arizona DOT, thank you.
Thank you.
And Chief Duggan, thanks so much.
All right, take care.
Thanks. And we'll see you back here. Well, actually, this is our last regular virtual discussion of the year. We are taking the end of November and December off to plan for 2021, so that we have excellent panels every single week. But we will have one more in December, but it's kind of a surprise. So stay tuned, follow us on Twitter at PAVE Campaign. And I think you might enjoy what we have planned for you in December. So until then, thank you for joining us, and thank you for making AV education a priority.